information in this presentation was gathered based on the extensive work that Bill and I have done. We've met with the city several times. It's not a perfect presentation. It's meant to be balanced and unbiased. Hopefully it'll come across that way to you, but we give no guarantees as to what to include, what not to include. We've had so many people give input as to what should be included, both from a pro and from a con viewpoint. If it didn't make it in the presentation, we tried to put it in the handout. This is an overview of the presentation. We'll talk about what is the city's plan for paving, sidewalks, master plans. What are the current tax rates? We'll look at an overview of the two parks bonds. Then we'll look at the land acquisition bond, the parks improvement bond, at cost to the individual homeowner, and then the handout, frequently asked questions. We attempted to make a one-page summary of what this is all about. Over the past couple of years, the city has worked on this master parks plan with input from the community. It's about that thick. If you haven't seen it, I've got a copy of it down here. This is the master parks plan, which was approved in the summer, put together by Lowson Associates. An overview of the issue here is in this plan, they find that our parks are deficient in every category. So if you want to take care of that deficiency, it is going to cost about $9 a month for the land acquisition bond and the same for the improvements bond. And that's for what we deem to be an average residence or average home in Dunwoody, which means an appraised value of $350,000. My home in Winter Hall probably has a market value of $450,000. It appraises for a little bit more than that amount. Dunwoody's integrated plan involves paving, sidewalks, transportation, the two master plans, and then we'll talk about the parks bonds. We thought it would be relevant to touch on these issues so you can see what the city's plan is for spending money on those objectives. Here's a map of Dunwoody. The roads in red are the roads that will be paved in Dunwoody over the next several years. In 2010, the city spent $700,000. This year, $2 million. You can see some of the work going on in our main thoroughfares. $2.5 million in 2012 is a tentative number the city's working towards. That's the level that the city's been told by the experts. That's about where you need to be, have your roads upgraded and continuously maintained over the years. Sidewalks, the community spoke and said we want our sidewalks completed. DeKalb County actually did a pretty good job with sidewalks. The budget in 2012 as a result of that is $1.1 million. So sidewalks should be completed relatively quickly in Dunwoody. Again, the red shows where sidewalks will be placed. So the City Council has made paving and sidewalks a priority. In the first few years of operation, the city ran a surplus. Now those monies will be flowing to paving and sidewalks. Here's the map showing the master transportation plan, which does not include paving. This is more turn lanes, intersection improvements, timing of traffic lights. The city currently does not have any money budgeted for this because next July you'll have a chance to vote on a regional 1-cent sales tax called the Transportation Splost. And that money will be divvied up between various projects in various jurisdictions. Dunwoody will get about $1 million a year if that 1-cent sales tax is approved. In addition to that, we are on the list for some projects. I think I read just 2 days ago, $12 million for Mount Vernon Road. Is that correct? So for improvements to Mount Vernon Road in Dunwoody. This is the master plan for Dunwoody Village, put together with community input by these organizations. You'll notice this green area here, I think it's about 2 acres. The concept here is if you put green space, a town green, in the village area, it will attract economic development. And that location is where the post office is. This is the Georgetown area, 285 down here. And again, this is the master plan. And again, the contemplation is that there will be some green space built into Georgetown to attract economic development and to revitalize that area. And those green space areas do tie into the park's bonds. Current tax rates in Dunwoody. Currently, you pay, in Dunwoody, you pay about 40 mills each year to the county and the city and the school board. The city portion of that for city services, which means police, paving, zoning, and parks, is 2.74 mills. That's where we were when we incorporated. That's where we are today. So our city council's done an excellent job in maintaining the millage rate at a level that is the lowest in the metro area by a good measure. In that same time, DeKalb County has gone from 2.74 mills to 6.39. If you were still an unincorporated DeKalb, you would be paying DeKalb County more than twice what you're paying the city for police, paving, parks, and zoning, what are called city services. Other DeKalb cities range from 7 to 17 mills for the same services. You translate that into dollars. For the average home, you're paying about $240 a year to get those services. In unincorporated DeKalb, it'd be over $500. Other DeKalb cities are much higher. We owe a real debt of gratitude to our city council for the excellent work they've done in that regard. Overview of the two parks bonds. First, let's look at the city map with the parks. There's Dunwoody Nature Center up by Austin Elementary. There's North DeKalb Cultural Arts Center, which is the old Dunwoody Elementary School where the library is. Down here is Perimeter Center Park, which is several acres next to City Hall. It's not a park yet, but the land is there. Georgetown Park, which is a concept of putting green space in the Georgetown area per the master plan. And then the farmhouse, Donaldson Chesnut Farmhouse. Brook Run at over 100 acres. And then over by the waterworks on Peeler is Windwood Hollow Park. Most people don't know anything about Windwood Hollow. They don't know anything about Perimeter Center East. And this is a new concept down here. These are the questions that will be on the ballot on November 8th that you'll have a chance to vote on. In the red, land acquisition bond, general obligation bonds in the amount of $33 million. Yes or no? Same for the Parks Improvement Bond, general obligation bonds. General obligation means that the city can use any revenues that it has available to it to pay off the bonds. It doesn't have to use new property taxes. And the $33 million doesn't mean that the city council has to issue bonds in that amount. They can issue $1 million in the first year, $5 million in year 3. They can do it incrementally over time on an as-needed basis. Pointing out that there will also be the school board asking you to renew the 1 cent sales tax that's been in place for 15 years, to renew it for another 5 years for school construction. So just be aware that that'll be there also. Here's an overview of the bonds if they're approved. Council's maximum authority will be $33 million. The projected millage rate for each bond will be 0.75. Since this calculation was done, the interest rates have actually dropped a little bit. So that millage rate would be about 10% less than that. But as a city, if both bonds are approved, the city would be paying $4.2 million a year in principal and interest payments. This is assuming that $66 million is issued on February 1, 2012 at 4.7%. The commercial property owners, the mall and the office buildings and the apartment complexes will pay $1.7 million. That's 40%. The homeowners, which is us, will pay $2.5 million a year as a city. And the city does have the option of using non-property tax revenues. This is a pie chart assuming the city issues $66 million. Right now, property taxes are about 25% of the $21 million budget. Residential property taxes will go from $3.6 million currently to $6.1 if both bonds are approved. That's that $2.5 million difference we just looked at. The millage rate, which we looked at earlier at 2.74 mils, if both bonds were approved and 1.5 mils were applied, would jump to 4.24 mils. That's a percentage basis, that's quite a jump. On a relative basis, our total millage rate would still be less than unincorporated Gab and other cities. Fran Miller and I, when we wrote the charter with the help of some of the people in this room, we put in there a cap on this base tax rate, this operational tax rate, 2.74. The council has the option, without approval of the citizens, to raise it to 3.04 mils, which is 0.3 mil increase. So they don't have a lot of room. If they want to raise it any higher than that, they have to come for a vote for the citizens. We did that because we wanted to keep that rate low. Now we'll talk about the land acquisition bond. That obviously is money to buy additional parkland. The city council's rationale for that is that in the parks planning process, seeking community input, a target was set by the community that we wanted to have 5.5 acres per 1,000 residents in parks. That's more than what we currently have, but it's about half of what national standards which say you should have, which is 10.5 acres per 1,000. That means as a city we'd need to acquire 90 acres more, which if you pay $400,000 an acre, which might be a bit high, that's in the $30 million range. The city council believed that this is the time to do it because property prices are low and interest rates for bonds, which is a major cost, are very low, perhaps the lowest they've ever been. Now, there are those who would say it's the worst time to do it also because other taxes are going up and also the economy is bad. So that reminds me of Charles Dickens wrote in The Tale of Two Cities, in the opening sentence, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. So as voters, you'll get to decide whether this is wisdom or foolishness when you vote. So, I've always enjoyed that quote. The city has already made one contingent land acquisition, the Emory Hospital over in the Georgetown area, 19 acres at $320,000 an acre. But this purchase is contingent on the bond. If the land acquisition bond is not passed, this contract goes away, and that then will be available to developers. Here's the PVC farm, which the city has already purchased with money other than Parks bond money. Incidentally, this is Brook Run right here. Most of the discussion about the purpose of this property has been possibly for athletic fields for Dunwoody. So we have 19 acres under contract. The city might be looking for another 50 acres or more. If you do that, you've got to look at the aging apartment complexes because that's where the money is going to be best spent. That's where the lowest price per acre is. Probably over in the Winter's Chapel area, there are some old apartment complexes. There's a secondary benefit there. There's quite a bit of crime and gang activity in those apartment complexes. So if the city were to redevelop one of those complexes into a park, it would help to turn that area. Possibilities are soccer, lacrosse, baseball, tennis. So we have the hospital property plus possibly an apartment complex or two. And the city plans on asking sports associations to maintain and run those athletic fields or sports complex to cover that cost. So the city would build the ball diamond or the soccer field, and then someone else would take it over. Very similar to what happens at Murphy County right now with private association. The city's also looking at doing mini parks, maybe a half acre here and there, so you could walk from your house a short distance to a green space area, also known as pocket parks. The Dunwoody Village Town Green, which we saw earlier in the master plan, this is another concept drawing in the parks plan, and the land acquisition money could be used for this also. Now we'll talk about the Parks Improvements Bond. This is the money to improve the parks. And the council's rationale is that basically if you look at our parks, they really have never been fully developed as parks. And we'll take a look at that. There have been a lot of questions about how specific are the plans for these parks. If you look at the parks plan, there's 8 pages that look like this with listed items for each park. It's fairly specific. Here, 10 bike racks for Brook Run, $7,500. Projected total cost of about $36 million for all the parks. Now, this list is not legally binding on the future council. So even though the parks plan has some specific ideas in it, specific list of improvements to the parks, it's not binding on future city council. But we would expect future city council to follow the parks plan. We're going to talk about each individual park. This is Brook Run today, 1998, purchased by the county. It's an old mental hospital site. Many of the legacy buildings are still there. The hospital was torn down, I think, 2 years ago by the city. But the county did make investments, the playground and the skate park. But Brook Run itself has never been fully developed. There's the middle school right there. And this is the plan from the parks plan with the improvements. The plan is to spend on the order of $15 million. Going back 8 years ago, there was a study done, a master plan study that projected $37 million for Brook Run. So it's a relatively modest plan in terms of cost. The parks plan also allocates $5 million to improve the athletic fields at the middle school, on the presumption there might be a joint use agreement between the city and the school board. So here's some of the things that will be done to Brook Run. You have a great lawn, a large grassy area here that'll be a multi-use field, 3 or 4 restrooms. You'll have nature trails. You'll have a multi-use trail going around the perimeter. And then, of course, you have picnic areas, pavilions, disc golf, volleyball, basketball, tennis courts in Brook Run. The Nature Center currently has 2 ball fields. It's got an old, small, single-family home that serves as the base of operations, and it's got nature trails. My wife and I walked this morning with our dog all through this area. It's a very pleasant walk. Over the next 5 years, if the improvements bond is passed, the plan calls for about $3 million to improve the trails, build a building here of 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. The nonprofit that operates as the Nature Center would raise money to contribute to that. There'll be, for the first time in that part of Dunwoody, a large grassy area for people to congregate, for children to play kickball or whatever. Of course, a playground, a pavilion. I want to see this pond down here made larger. Personally, I like the idea of having a pond. But you'll have a restroom that you can use, and you'll have more parking. That's the concept. The ball diamonds will be moved to one of the new properties that are purchased with the acquisition bond. Most likely. If you look at the Donaldson Chesnut Farm, this is an important historical property that Dunwoody Preservation Trust is very interested in. The buildings really are not in a state that they can be used at this point. The plan for that is for it to be converted at a cost of about $2.9 million into what they call an interpretive farm for educational and historic purposes. The facility would be open for community events, weddings, that sort of thing. This is the Perimeter Center East Park that most of you probably know nothing about. Right across from City Hall, several acres, surrounded by apartments and commercial development. Currently it's just trees and underbrush. But to give those folks an area where they can take their children, their dogs, some green space, a fountain, and some walking trails. Projected cost about $1.5 million. This is Windwood Hollow Park over by the waterworks. It is an existing park that has 2 tennis courts, a few parking spaces, and an old playground. It would be turned into more of a community park with 4 tennis courts, some green space, a new playground, walking trails, and a larger parking area so people could actually visit the park easily. That cost projected to be $1.9 million. The Parks Plan also lists $4 million to do green space improvements in the Georgetown area. This is one of the concept drawings for Georgetown. And also lists $3 million for the Cultural Arts Center, where Stage Door Players and Sproul Center has many of its classes. We had a meeting with the Perimeter Community Improvement District, the mall area, about a month ago. They're very excited about these parks bonds. They're a group of businesses that tax themselves 4 mills each year. They raise several $1 million. That's why you have all the new paving, the new street lights and everything in that area. That's why it looks so good. This is the Fulton County, DeKalb County line. So the mall is right here with Ashford Dunwoody, right in this area. This is the Sandy Springs portion of the PCID. But they asked me to put a slide in here because they're very excited about partnering with the city to create some sort of plaza or green space where their office workers could congregate in conjunction with the city. If the improvements bond is not passed, this information provided by the city would show that Brook Run in the next 10 years would be some limited improvements, move the dog park. However, we're hopeful that our lawsuit, the city currently has a lawsuit against the county to recover as much as $7 million for money that was allocated to Brook Run from the 2003 county parks bond. If we were to win in that lawsuit at some point, we could use that money to improve Brook Run. But that money would be limited to Brook Run. So there will be, hopefully there'll be some money available to improve Brook Run even if the bond doesn't pass. For the Nature Center, the plan would be to resurface the parking lot in the next 5 years. The farm, we would stabilize the buildings. The park by the perimeter would get some grading and trails, and Windwood Hollow would get a playground, and that's the next 10 years or so. So there would be some money available. From the homeowner's perspective, what is the cost? We've struggled with this, Bill McCann, Bill Robinson, and I, how to express this. We think the most relevant thing is to look at what does it mean for you as a homeowner? Because there are so many different people talking about cost in different ways. You look at the land acquisition bond, there's that average home again at appraised value of $350,000. If you do the calculation at 7.5 mils, the cost of the homeowner is about $9 a month, about $105 a year. Now, if you itemize taxes, those real estate taxes will be deductible, so your cost is reduced somewhat. And we present a bracket here between $200,000 and $500,000 to show that the price could be higher or lower depending on the value of your home. That assumes 28% tax bracket. This is sort of the bottom line for the homeowner. Now, if you sell your home, the debt doesn't stay with you, the debt stays with the house. So the next homeowner would pick up those real estate taxes. And then for the improvements bond, again, assuming the full $33 million is spent, it's the same thing. So the two bonds together, if you were to support both of them, would be $18 a month or $210 a year. But you might choose to support one or the other. You know, my personal view, I'm a little biased. I support both, but to me the more urgent one is this up into two bonds. You might want to vote for one and not the other. Another way to view the cost of the homeowner, there's much talk about debt for the city and so on, but if you look at it from the homeowner's perspective, the bond debt for the average home is about $1,650 per bond, or $3,300 total. And just like your mortgage, you would be paying those bonds off over 30 years. $9 a month for one bond, $18 a month for both bonds. Unlike a mortgage, though, if you sell your home, you stop paying for the bonds. On your mortgage, you have to pay it off. The concept here from the city's perspective is by doing this, you spread the cost over typically more than one homeowner, usually two, maybe three. The total principal and interest payments over 30 years would be $6,200 in future value. Some people object to including that, but a lot of people like looking at that. Well, that's not present value, those are future payments. So that's it. The frequently asked questions are in the handout. And the neat thing about this is it's your decision. And it will impact you locally. So here are the questions you might consider. Do we need additional parkland? Yes or no? Do we need to improve our existing parks and any land that we acquire? Yes or no? How much is it going to cost? Is this a good use of your hard-earned money? And will our city officials, elected officials, be good stewards of these funds? So that's the consideration. Now you have a handout that you can read through. There's a lot of argument going on about different questions. We try to include arguments both pro and con. So if you have questions, now would be the time to do it. Neil?
Okay, $39 per month per bond issue, 18 total covers the payment on the bond itself. The land, assuming that there is, say, improvement made to a variety of these properties like you outlined,
Yes.
there's going to be maintenance, there's going to be staffing, there's going to be operating costs like water and electricity, I presume there's going to be lights and restrooms. I don't really see anything about that. What's that going to cost?
Well, that's one of the questions addressed in the frequently asked questions. And maintenance costs will go up. But for the newly acquired land and the athletic fields and so on, we try to get sports organizations to maintain and run those facilities. Try to get the Dunwoody Preservation Trust, try to get Dunwoody Nature Center nonprofit to address those costs. But there will be some additional cost, I believe. The Parks Plan makes the point that when you actually increase programs that are available, you have a substantial increase in fees that flow to the city, also user fees. But we have Brent Walker here. Brent, why don't you speak to Dale's question about maintenance costs?
Dan's correct, and there will be an increase in maintenance costs. I'm sure. It's hard to put a specific dollar amount to that because it depends on the facilities that we deal. If they're passive parks, maintenance costs are lower. If they're athletic facilities, as Dan was saying, we will be partnering with other agencies that have already approached us about wanting to move into these facilities in
sense, that's sort of found money that they don't budget for. And we're actually in that situation this year. And it's one of the reasons the city's able to increase paving next year, as I understand it, maybe to $2.5 million. Because the city did it 80%. That's also one of the primary reasons when you look at your tax bill this year, the dollar amount at the bottom is more because they went with an 80% post-tax credit rather than a 95%. The county also raised taxes for Dunwoody residents 1.46 mils. And unincorporated Gavin went up 4.35 mils. So when you look at your tax bill, my taxes went up, I think, close to $400 a year. And I think it's those two factors. The school system kept the taxes flat. If the city were to buy an apartment complex, would that change the difficulties we're having with the nearby apartment complexes? In that Winters Chapel, Peachtree Industrial area, there are 3 apartment complexes which account for, I've been told, 30–40% of our police calls and most of our gang activity in our schools. And I think the city's looking at buying 1 or more of those apartment complexes. And part of the goal, if that happens, is to tie it to improvements to the other apartments. And I don't want to get into a lot of detail beyond that.
into Murphy County. The baseball fields, the softball fields, and the football fields are all privately funded operations. Football team pays for all the football stadium lights and the time and the clocks. The baseball people pay for that. There's one downside. Try taking your wife and your kids and your grandkids to Murphy County Park for a pickup game of baseball. You can't get on those baseball fields. They're just not available. So that's the downside of this public-private partnership, and I'm dealing it right now with Concord Soccer, is get the private-public partnership money in. That brings a whole other list of questions into the equation of how we get public access to these fields, and that the city is not going out and putting the money for private organizations to have ball fields and places to play. And there's nothing in these plans, nothing that talks about ball fields, talks about soccer fields, talks about lacrosse fields, nothing.
That's not correct.
It is correct. If you have ball
Nature
fields here,
center,
there's no mention of improvement money for soccer fields or individual fields other than parkland that you're planning to put in by displacing 3 apartment complexes on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. And Senator Weber said it again. We can use this for redevelopment. You cannot. If the city of Dunwoody
You
wants
can,
to go ahead,
Bob. You
cannot.
can.
If the city of Dunwoody wants to go ahead and tear down apartment complexes and displace 539 units in one building, one section alone, okay, that is a redevelopment issue, not a park issue. And I'll break that in half, Dennis.
Bob,
You're
Bob.
making, there's no question there.
That's a
there's
statement.
no,
Because this is a
if every
statement.
citizen
Others
does
want to
15
make-
This is a statement,